Check, check. You guys got that? Hey, I want to thank Bob for inviting me out to this. It's really an honor for me to be out here. I've been hearing about these clinics for pretty much my whole career. And before we start with Wash and just do a little sort of a town hall talk, I want to talk about what a great opportunity this is for you guys, and don't take it for granted. When I was my first year as a GA at University of Maryland, my first AFCA convention, I was so excited, man. I was in San Francisco, and man, I had my shoes shined and a lot of number 2 pencils sharpened up, and I was looking at the agenda, and it's like, wow, Steve Spurrier's going to talk about passing offense, and then whoever's going to talk about Jim Lambright's going to talk about their attack defense and this and this. Man, I'm sitting up in the front row where Bob is right there, and I got my pencil sharpened, a brand new book, and there comes Steve Spurrier, comes up and says, yeah, we're number 1 in the college football and offense, and here is our wide receiver coach to tell you what we did. He took off, he went to the bar, and we got about 2 hours on curl flat, and that's how we got to be number 1, and some curl flat, drawing it all up. And then you get to University of Washington attack defense, which was all the rage, and you get an hour on cover 3. And it was, and what I'm saying is, there wasn't a lot of information that was shared. And the one thing I respect about this clinic over the years is you guys have never been shy about sharing information. I've watched these tapes trying to learn from the other side. It's one of the reasons I felt compelled to come back here is I've watched from the other side trying to figure out what offensive coaches are taking from this. And one more story, Jim actually came to the University of Maryland. I was a grad assistant in 1989. It was the spring of 1990. He was getting ready for the draft, and we had some offensive linemen. He came to work those guys out. Well, our staff shanghaied him into a clinic. And the Bengals were running a lot of zone stuff that not a lot of other people were running. At the time in Maryland, we were all scheme block. We were down blocking and base blocking, and there wasn't a whole lot. Zone blocking and bucket step and butt blocking and all those terms were completely new to us. And Jim was really generous. I'm sure he had flights to catch and everything else, but was really generous with his time. Probably did about a 4-hour clinic for our staff. And I wasn't an offensive line coach. I was a defensive coach. I was a defensive GA. I think I was in charge of helping him with his video. But I still, to this day, take a couple things out of that clinic. And it had nothing to do with bucket step. It had nothing to do with one arm's longer than 2 or butt blocking or anything else that went into it. He came and did a clinic, and he talked about the run game. And he had James Brooks and Icky Woods, and they were running outside zone and inside zone. And what'd you call it, 18 and 19? And then what was the inside, 12 and 13? 16 and 17. 16, 17. Okay, so it was 18, 19, 16, 17. And he's going through and extremely generous. There was no secrets. He was explaining to John Zernhelt every step, every look that we were getting, how they were doing it, soup to nuts. And our head coach was Joe Krivak, and Joe was obsessed with terminology, and he was obsessed with a lot of minutia. And Jim would say, hey, look, 16, 17, 18, 19, that's us. That's what we do. 90% of our run game is those 2 plays. Inside zone, outside zone. That's what we run. That's what we are. So we'd be watching the tape, and Jim would talk about it, and then there'd be a trap play that would come up or a draw. And coach would want to get Jim sidetracked. Well, what about that trap? He said, well, yeah, that was the game plan play. We had that in. We ran it once in that game. But what we do is 18, 19, 16, 17. James Brooks, Icky Woods, that's what we do. That's what we're good at. And he must have said that 100 times. I heard somebody say, I think it might have been him today, they was talking about being an offensive line coach and telling the offense coordinator or telling the head coach, run it again. And Jim would say, and I told him, run it again. He said, no, I didn't. I didn't say run it again. I said, run it up. And I took that away from that clinic, and I was right out of college, 23 years old. And the notes that I took out are probably still in my notebook somewhere, but again, it had nothing to do with bucket step. It had nothing to do with technique. It was know what you're good at and be committed to sticking with it. And I want to thank him personally for the lessons that he's given me over the years as a coach on the opposite side, but also the generosity with that time. So I just want to start off and thank you for doing that. And then I think Bob introduced Jeremiah Washburn. I got to work with Jeremiah's dad for over a decade, 10 years in Tennessee and then another year in Detroit. I think he's the finest defensive line coach maybe in the history of the National Football League. I have that such a high regard for him. I know he's done some battles with a lot of guys in this room. Is Coach Boudreau still here? Yeah, well, if him and Wash, they might have thrown down right up on the stage. When I was listening to him talk, Wash wouldn't have been able to sit on his hands during that one. They'd have been up here battling it out. But I got to know Jeremiah when he was, a senior at Arkansas?
College, yeah.
Yeah, going into his senior year in Arkansas. And when I became the head coach of the Lions, he was one of the first calls that I made. I had such respect for the way he handled himself and the way he had worked his career up into that point, which was similar to mine. So if it's okay with you guys, I'm just going to sort of throw it back and forth. I talked to Jeremiah a lot in these last couple of weeks leading up to this, and I thought that would probably be more useful for you guys than me getting up here and trying to explain what's important to me. Rather come from an offensive line coach's point of view so that you guys can try to dive down a little bit more into what's important for you. So why don't we just
fire away?
Yeah.
Is this too loud? Good? Okay. Appreciate you guys having me up here too. It's a privilege. This is my 7th, and it's a lifeblood for every young offensive line coach. You guys good in the back? You can hear me? We good? Okay. Hey, 2 quick plugs. I told Neil I'd do this. So we did buy some fit shields. I think he called for me. We were at Potbelly's. I was with Shockley at Potbelly's, O-line coach at Ouachita Baptist.
It's good to be a place where I won't have the highest cholesterol in the room, too.
Easy, bro. All right. The fit shields, good stuff. We bought 6 of them. We do not have a Boudreaux Hill. We do not have a Boudreaux sandpit. We have very flat ground in Allen Park, so they were really good. We're really focusing on lift with our guys, a lot like what Coach McNally's saying up here, Scott Peters. So they were great. So Neil, I hope you hear me. That's my plug. And then we did buy his fit sled too, the Mike Pope sled, and that's excellent. Ron Prince, our tight end coach, is using that. It's really been good for the tight ends. We used it with them last week. Excellent. So that's my plug for Gilman. We did get the stuff. Other plug, real quick, Jim. Scott Peters. So that stuff's legit. We have one of his guys, Darren Keaton, trained with him last year, and this was a kid that came in during rookie mini camp. I think it was yours. Yeah, it was yours. Yeah. So he was just a little dude from Central Michigan. He made it out of rookie minicamp. He was a rookie free agent. He got on our practice squad. He trained with Scott for off season, came back a different man, all right, as far as doing the clogging the elbow, the hay bale, all of those type things. He does that so you can see it, and it's really leveled the playing field for a little guy against bigger guys. And he has a legit shot to make our active roster. We're using some of Scott's stuff. I went and visited him in Arizona. It's legit, so I do really encourage that. As far as close quarter combat, which is what we deal with, it's exceptional, so I do recommend that. Fellas, I'm just going to fire away some O-line questions at Jim. It's kind of the keys to the kingdom, and just, saying about Jim, he was a great head coach to work for. He gave me my shot. As far as defensive coordinators go, he was the best, all right, as far as what we saw last year, because we got our ass whooped by him, and we gave up 6 sacks to him without, I don't think you guys blitzed. Yeah, so anyway, so he's exceptional. So I'm sitting up here.
Blitz tips, I'm the wrong guy.
Yeah, well, I'm going to ask that question anyway. But, fellas, I'm just going to ask some questions. I asked a couple of my buddies out there just some questions. And, again, we're going to kind of leave some time at the end. So just think of something, fire away, too, because I'm with Coach Wiley. You want to know what the other side's thinking. So you talked about your background a little bit, Jim, but you worked with some legit offensive line coaches, not me, but some good ones along the way. So just talk about that as far as guys that influenced you.
Well, I got my start in the NFL in Cleveland in 1993 with Bill Belichick. And it was my first experience, obviously, in the NFL. Our offensive line coach was Kirk Ferentz, who is one of the finest teachers not only was in the NFL, but continues to be in college football. Every year there's another offensive lineman coming out of Iowa, the University of Iowa. But also we had Pat Hill there, and Pat was has been a long time head coach at Fresno State, and another very good offensive line coach. And it's one of the first times that I'd ever seen the dynamic of two coaches coaching a position. What I saw there is working hand in hand. Neither guy had very big ego. Kirk was able to handle scheme and handle getting ready for the Pittsburgh Steelers. I saw Jim putting all this stuff up here with all the fire zones and picking up that stuff. And Pat was able to work with guys individually on technique. And I thought we were able to develop a lot of offensive linemen there. We turned Bob Dahl, who did you guys draft Bob Dahl here in Cincinnati? He was a defensive tackle from Notre Dame. And the Bengals drafted him in the 3rd round, I think around 91. He was out of the league, and they turned him into an offensive guard at Cleveland. Went on to have about a 10-year career as an offensive guard, and Wally Williams was an undrafted free agent from Florida A&M that at one time was the highest paid highest paid offensive lineman in the NFL, and Orlando Brown, who was an undrafted free agent out of South Carolina State, who at one time was the highest paid offensive lineman in the NFL. None of that would have been possible without two offensive line coaches. And I'd talked about having a notebook and writing it down, and it was at that point I said, I ever get to be a head coach, I'm going to have two offensive line coaches. Number one for scheme, but number two to develop players and to keep emphasizing technique. I think you guys have the greatest challenge of any position, whether it's high school, college, or NFL, because number one, your technique, most of what I hear up here is technique. It's so important to what you do. Closer to the ball, more important technique is. Hand-to-hand combat, more important technique is. But also there's the scheme and trying to handle 4 from a side and trying to handle stunts and blitzes and free safeties and corner blitzes and all that stuff. I really do think that it's hard for one guy to do by himself. So I got to be able to see both of those guys. In a quick Kirk Ferentz story, Kirk had come from University of Maine. He had been the head coach at Maine. And all spring we still had the old Betacam machines, and he was watching cut-ups and he was watching opponent film, and he thought that somebody in the office was screwing with him because he was looking at all the opposing defensive players, and he thought there was some setting on the thing that somebody had turned the speed up, just saying, okay, college guy, here's your initiation. And when he finally got to OTAs, we didn't call them OTAs back then, but mini camp, he realized, hey, wait a minute, this is the speed of the game, and there was such a drastic difference. From there, I got a chance to go down to Tennessee with Mike Munchak, not just a Hall of Fame player, but I really think a Hall of Fame coach, and totally different than Jeremiah's dad. Jim Washburn be the loudest guy on the field, and Mike Munchak probably be the quietest guy on the field, but two of the best position coaches that I've ever been around. And I've been around a lot of former players that want to coach, but mainly they want to start off as either the head coach or the offensive coordinator or defensive coordinator. Mike Munchak is a guy that has a gold jacket, and I can't tell you how much respect I have for that. But Mike started off, and Mike I think still has his signing bonus money from the Houston Oilers too. Mike started off as a quality control coach, which is the way I started off. But he started off as a quality control coach, working till midnight, grinding everything out, and I can't tell you how much respect. It wasn't about the money. He had all the money he ever needed his whole life, and it wasn't about status. I mean, he was a Hall of Fame player, but his willingness to start at the bottom, his willingness to start as a quality control guy made all the difference in his career. So again, being able to see Munch and watching him do a little different way. Munch was a master at putting guys in different positions. We were getting ready to start an OTA, and we didn't have a center on campus, and we were getting ready to practice the next day. He moved a 6th-round draft pick. It was a right tackle at a center. Got him Justin Hartwick, who ended up starting for about 8 years in the NFL at center after that. When I got to Detroit, I hired George Yarno, who had worked for a guy that I'd worked for in Cleveland, and Nick Saban. and brought Jeremiah Washburn along with him. And again, I really like the dynamic. Jeremiah, when he was the number 2 guy, was able to work with the practice squad players. After practice on Friday, he would stay out with some of those guys. He would have an extra film session with the practice squad guys and the backup players where he would take them in his room and watch film with them every day. So a lot of you guys are going through that. Believe me, there's a light at the end of the tunnel for that grunt work that you guys are going through. And I do think it's the hardest position to coach because, again, you have so much scheme, but you also have technique. So that's not
I do have a head coach question. Just the process of hiring an offensive line coach. So when you did that with George, just what you look for in terms of traits, coaching style, philosophy, what you're looking for from an offensive line coach just when you took over in Detroit.
Well, I think the biggest thing is you want to see somebody that's committed to technique. And obviously all you guys are, because that's all you guys talk about. So that was important to me. I don't know a lot about the techniques of offensive line coach. I try to study as much as I can. But I wanted to hear someone who was committed to technique, that believed in what he was teaching, was also open to, to improving. And I think George was that. But also someone who was smart enough and had the ability that he could handle his room and his position without getting a lot of outside help. I think that's something that flies below the radar in the NFL. Offensive line coaches, a lot of times they just get, okay, here's all our pass plays, protect all these. Hey, these are what we want to run. You got to block everything that comes up. You can't have somebody that needs direction from somebody else if you want to have a good offensive line coach. And I think all those guys that I mentioned, they didn't need direction from anybody else. They were very self-sufficient. They were self-starters, and they were coaching the most number of guys on the field. I mean, other than defensive backs, when you go to dime and there's 6 guys on the field, offensive line always has more guys than anybody on the field. So there's the ability to communicate to all those guys. I thought was important also.
Good. All right, last head coach question. In terms of personnel, because you did have an opinion on that, what did you look for in an offensive lineman?
Well, I got my start in Cleveland in personnel. I was a personnel assistant, started building highlight tapes for the draft and different things like that. And I got to learn an awful lot from Bill Belichick and the rest of the guys that were on that staff. Most of Bill Belichick's mantras and the things that he preached came from Bill Parcells. And he would say there's only 3 things. This is Bill Parcells speaking. I think if he was here now, he'd probably say the same thing. That only 3 things mattered when you talked about an offensive lineman, and it was big, smart, and tough. And if you had those things, then you could develop a player. And I've always sort of kept that in the back of my mind, because you can't coach big. I heard you guys say, hey, play long, play long. Fuck, Teron Smith from Dallas, man, he wakes up long. Oh boy, he ain't playing long. I mean, he got 37-inch arms. I mean, it's the short arm guys that are the challenge, and it's hard. You can't coach big. Coach Boudreau talking about coaching tough, and those guys were pain in the ass, putting their hands on you when they're going downfield. But there's something about toughness with a player. You can't coach tough. A guy's tough or he's not. You can accentuate it, but I don't know that you can make a guy tough if he's not. And then smart. There's an awful lot to be learned. If you had those 3 things, those are the 3 things that we thought that you needed to develop. We talked about developing offensive linemen. Been around an awful lot of offensive linemen that have developed into good players. Marsh talked about Key. I was in Cleveland. We brought in Andy McCullum, not the coach Andy McCullum, but the center. We brought him in as a snapper for minicamp. only because we were trying to move Wally Williams to guard, and we didn't. Trying to find a guy that wouldn't break the quarterback's hand. And he was a GA at Toledo. He had graduated from Toledo, had no offers, was a GA at Toledo. One of our coaches had been the offensive line coach there, and Bill Belichick was saying, look, I need somebody for passing camp that's just not going to break the quarterback's hand. He says, I got a guy, he's a GA there. He came in, he was 265 pounds. I think Andy played like 16 years in the NFL or something like that. He played forever and kept on going, but he was incredibly smart, he was incredibly tough, and he wanted to develop, and sometimes we can lose that. As much as we want to develop players, if he doesn't want to develop, we're fighting a losing battle. So I always tried to look for those things. Some of those guys are easy. The Tron Smiths are easy. Those guys that you're drafting in the 6th, 7th free agent, you need to find some traits that you can hang your hat on. I think I always wanted to hang our hat on big, smart, and tough. If we had those, we could develop a player.
Absolutely. All right, here we go, scheme stuff. I wanted to start with protection here, fellas. So first question is this, Jim, just discuss your process for scheming six-man protections.
Well, let me just talk about it, passing game in general and pass rush in general. All due respect to the guys in this room, we didn't start with the offensive line. We didn't look at your stances. We didn't look at the individual techniques or anything else, because it didn't have as much to do with you guys as it did that quarterback. And it was something that we developed, and when I say we, usually I talk about Jim Washburn, Jeremiah's dad, and myself. I think back in the early 2000s, Javon Curse was a blistering bitch off the edge. I mean, nobody could block him. He was 6'5", 6'6", long ass arms, just a blur on the outside. And when we'd play the Oakland Raiders beat us in the AFC Championship game. The year they went on to the Super Bowl, they lost to Tampa in the Super Bowl. But Javon, when he graded out in the game, I bet you he graded out 95%. He was wearing Lincoln Kennedy out with speed rush. But the problem was he couldn't get to the quarterback, because fucking Rich Gannon was under center and he was dropping 5 yards deep, and all Lincoln Kennedy knew that if Javon went wide, it didn't matter because Gannon was getting rid of the ball. And it was really the first time that we started tying the quarterback in and his depth and his launch point in with personnel groups and protections and things like that. And what started off with Wash, using graph paper with each block being a yard and putting the center and the guards, where he would go through the film and he'd just make a little X mark every time a quarterback threw a pass. He was 6 yards and he was, right here on the inside of the right guard. He was 5 yards deep and he was right behind the center. He escaped out to his left and he got rid of the ball. He was 10 yards deep and he was, 2 yards outside of the offensive tackle. What he started doing is he just started that graph, and it was really simple in the beginning. It was, where's the quarterback? Because a little bit like special teams coaches talk about the block point. And if you want to block a field goal or an extra point, how you got to be able to get there. And you guys have seen, you go wide, all they're going to do is push you past and go. You got to trust your quarterback to be able to do it. But it was the first time that we really tied it, and it ended up going from graph paper to computer reports, and we could break it down by personnel group, we could break it down by down and distance. But what we wanted to see is, where is the quarterback? Because it didn't matter if you could beat the offensive tackle on an outside move if the ball wasn't there. I mean, if the quarterback wasn't there. So we started talking a little bit more about rushing spots and rushing a quarterback rather than rushing protections and individual techniques of offensive linemen. So that's probably the biggest thing, and looking and saying, if this guy escapes, where is he going? And it was shocking. You'd look at this report, and some guys like Peyton Manning would never escape. All their, they look like a marksman. All the marks where he released the ball, it looked like a sniper. All of them were in the exact same spot. He wasn't straying very far from that. Other guys, you didn't know where the guy was going to be. It might be Michael Vick, or it might be somebody else. He's escaping here, he's escaping there. But that was really the place that we started our pass rush plan. How much time do we have to get there, where we were rushing, and then also started looking, if he's escaping, where is he escaping? Is he stepping up? Is he bailing to his hand? Is he bailing away from his hand? Is he coming in to get out, or is he bailing deep to get out? And we started getting away from pass rush, and I think, you look up, you go to the old manuals, and you'll see 4 pass rush lanes. And you'll hear coaches, 30 years ago, 40 years ago talk about, 4-man pass rush. There has to be a guy in the A lane, and the B lane, and the C lane, and the D lane. You keep contained on this side, keep contained on this side. Well, because of those graphs and because of the information we got from them, we threw all that stuff out. We started saying, okay, hey, we want Peyton Manning to leave the pocket. We want him off the spot. We don't care if he breaks contain. Michael Vick, if he's going to escape, we got to make an escape away from his throwing hand, because he's dangerous when he can go out with his throwing hand. So that probably was the biggest thing. Everybody looks at where to center slide, where the back's offset, what kind of edge you can get there, trying to figure out, is the center Mike is he declaring a Mike and trying to sift straight back? Is he leaning one way? Are they 3-3 with the back? They got to throw hot off 4 from a side. We look hard into that, but it really starts with the quarterback. And I would encourage you guys, within your self-scout, you're always looking at your offensive linemen, you're looking at their stances and everything else, and we look at all that stuff also, but tie it in with your quarterback, tie it in with your passing game, because that's really where we started making some progress. The way you rush on 3rd down and 8 is a hell of a lot different than the way you rush on 3rd down and 3. Okay, it's not so much trying to respect the run. It has to do with where the ball's being launched. I think about this, when I coach defense, and all you offensive line coaches, I think you're all the same. You all try to get as far away from the line of scrimmage as you can. Every time I've ever seen you guys get as far down on the other side, and usually there'd be a couple inactive players down chart and stuff, and you'd have an offensive line coach, and I don't know how many times I'd hear the coach relay the play to the player. The player would say, hey, what do we got here, coach? And he'd say 62 or 60 or whatever protection it was. In my mind, that's not enough information. Well, we needed more information than that to be able to rush the quarterback, because it really wasn't just about how many guys were into protection, where the center was sliding, everything else. It was what the route concept is. We had a hard time sacking Rich Gannon. And the reason is the ball was coming out too quick. If we got no sacks in the game, I don't know, you guys got to know Wash, working with him 10 years, put some of the gray hair on my head, but it also put some money in my pocket. If we didn't get sacks on Sunday, by the time I got to work on Monday morning, I had a list of every pass thrown on my desk and how fast it was thrown. 1.2 seconds, 1.3 seconds, 1.1 second, 0.78 seconds. We don't have a chance. We can't get a sack. The ball's coming out too fast. Well, rather than keep bitching about that, we started trying to develop a system to say, okay, well, look, we got to do something about it. So in establishing our rush plan, that's where we started. We started with the quarterback. Where can he escape? What's he good? Is he a step up in the pocket guy? Is he escape guy? Where do we need to keep contained? Because we didn't keep contained on both sides. There'd be some circumstances we would, but most guys we didn't keep contained on both sides. We wanted to give our guys free rein to make inside moves, particularly the right defensive end working that left tackle. Most right-handed quarterbacks have a hard time escaping out to their right side. We say, look, we want him out there. We want him escaping this way and then trying to get reset. John Turlink was really a good defensive line, or still is a good defensive line coach. And we had Steve McNair. He would pimp Steve McNair. I heard somebody talking about Dwight Freeney earlier today. Dwight Freeney would run a wide-ass speed rush. The left defensive end would make an inside move. The left tackle and the end would make inside moves, vacate the quarterback. Steve would see that open air and would drift into that free spot where here came Freeney around on a fishhook rush and tomahawk a ball loose. I can't tell you how many times I saw that. It was all because they didn't have an A gap or an A rusher and a B rusher and a C rusher and keep it contained on both sides. We'd start there. We go a little bit deeper into down and distance. The way we'd rush on 1st and 10 obviously is going to be different than the way you rush on 3rd and 10, because 1st and 10, at least you have to be able to play the run if the run does show. When it's 3rd and 10, you're just playing the run on the way to the quarterback if it happens to show. But also the depth. When you start breaking that stuff down and saying, okay, here's all the 1st and 10 launch points. What you find out is you get a lot of play action. You're getting, a little bit deeper shots. They're not, getting rid of the ball as quick on 1st and 10. And now you have time to be able to rush deeper spots. That speed rush, that might be the time for that speed rush, where on 3rd down and 3, it's not the time. So we started breaking down. You'd have that same quarterback drop sheet, or we called it a quarterback hit chart. You could do it by personnel, 11 personnel versus 21 personnel, 1st and 10 versus 3rd down and 10, field zones. Most quarterbacks aren't holding the ball very long in the red zone. I don't know how many times, we got to where we wouldn't speed rush in the red zone because ball's coming out too fast. Quarterbacks aren't taking that because you can't push routes down the field in the red zone. You don't have time to get a 15-yard route. You're on the 4-yard line. There's no such thing as a 15-yard route. You're out of bounds if that happens. So I would encourage you guys to make sure that you guys include that. Understand your quarterback's capabilities and where he's going to be as to what you're expecting from a pass rush team. That's probably the biggest thing that we talked about. Like I said, we try to figure where the center was going. It's easy if he has a declared side. Okay, and he's responsible for one side as opposed to the next. And that's a lot easier than the guy that's a Mike declaration that's going to pop back and help on both sides and try to help MDM to whatever guy shows. When we got to that, even if we weren't if we weren't blitzing, we try to do something to try to command a Mike declaration. Stepping up into an A gap, walking the guy out to the outside of the defensive end. Do something to put a red light on in that said, this guy is the Mike declaration. And it's one thing Wash and I worked an awful lot on, and quite honestly, we didn't do enough. I thought we did a better job this year at Buffalo than we had ever done when I was with Wash at Tennessee, of tying our Mike in to our 4-man pass rush game. Now, he was responsible for pass coverage, whether it was man-to-man or zone, but what we were showing on defense to try to get that declaration, to try to make the Mike respect him first, to be able to create a one-on-one matchup with the back, or to just to get a 2-on-2 side, just if it was only for a split second. That was important to us. The other thing that we started doing, and a lot of it had to do with the quarterback and where he'd escape, we started trying to rush 5-man blitz principles with 4 guys. And there's an adage that if Bill Belichick was up here, he'd say, if you have a bad offensive line, you want to rush 5. Okay, because he wants one-on-ones. If the guys aren't very good, don't give them a chance to help each other. Okay, get in that 5-down look or bring another guy and make those guys all defend one-on-one. It's a lot easier for them when the center can help to one side, the back's chipping to the other, and you're only rushing 4. He said bad offensive lines, rush 5. Okay, good offensive lines, rush 4. Okay, if you have a quarter, and I get later into 3-man rush stuff. But it's a lot of times, and last year at Buffalo I had outstanding corners. But a lot of times in the past we didn't have as good a corners, and it would hard. Wash would say, hey, look, we got to bring 5 against this guy. I said, well, Wash, we can't cover these 5. I can't bring 5 because we can't win in one-on-ones on the outside part of the field. So what we started doing is he started coming up with all the patterns that we'd use for every 5-man pressure, but we'd only use them in some circumstances, certain quarterbacks, but that 5th guy would be a ghost. Okay, if we were playing Peyton Manning and we didn't have him, and we didn't care about him escaping the pocket, particularly to his left, away from his throwing hand, we would 4-man pass rush, pretending like we had a guy outside that was keeping contained. Okay, and what happened is, and that was where Wash came, it was 5-man pass rush principles by rushing only 4. Sometimes it was inside guys, sometimes it was outside guys, but I think that was probably where that ended up going. And again, it all had to do with the quarterback. The next thing I do, just looking from a game plan standpoint, that's the very first thing. When we start a rush plan, the very first thing we were looking at was the quarterback. Okay? Then the next thing we started looking at was how the quarterback reacts versus blitz. One of the cut-ups we would have would be nothing but blitz against the quarterback for however many games that we had, 5-game breakdown. And you keep percentage how the guy does versus blitz. Now, last year we probably blitzed less than anybody in the NFL. I've had a lot of years. My last year in Tennessee, I think we blitzed like 8% of the time. Okay, we were one of the best defenses in the NFL. Look, we didn't have to blitz. We had Javon Curse, we had Kyle Vandenbosch, we had Albert Hainsworth. Shit, blitz just got the ball out faster. We wanted the quarterback to hold the ball. We wanted to get a chance to get him. So we wanted to look at the quarterback. We played the Packers this year. We were fortunate enough to beat them in Buffalo this year. But you're crazy to blitz Aaron Rodgers. Aaron Rodgers was like 93% effective against the blitz. Why in the world do you want to bring another guy out of coverage to blitz a guy when you can't get there anyway? Peyton Manning never take a blitz. Worst thing in the world to do to Peyton Manning. I was able to get after Stafford a little bit, number one from my experience with Matt. But Matt was great versus blitz. You know, when I was in Detroit, we were hoping teams would blitz us. So again, we wanted to see. Now, if a quarterback struggled to find answers versus the blitz, he didn't know when he was warm, when he was hot. He didn't know what his answers were. He was going to get a good steady dose of blitz. But so that helped guide us. Self-scout your own blitz reel, the number of times people blitz against you, how effective you are. It gives you a good idea of how much blitz you're going to get in the game. Okay, if you're struggling against the blitz, obviously you're going to get a lot more. If you're ripping teams every time they bring that free safety will, then you're not going to see it. You're not going to see it as much. So starting with the quarterback, how he is against the blitz, where he sets and throws, where you're rushing, what point you're rushing, and again, a lot like a special teams coach with a block point as opposed to rushing an offensive lineman. The next thing we'd want to see is the pass rush reels, is how guys pass games. Okay, some guys pass games better, and then this is where you start getting a little bit more into individual players. The right guard has a hard time passing games. The center has a hard time passing 3-man games. Now let me say this about 3-man games. 3-man games all look great. Okay, we put all of them on a reel at the end of the year. We had all the 3-man pass rush games, and every one is fucking sweet. Where the guy's coming free, and every one the ball was gone because they take so long to get there. It's hard to get there in 3-man pass rush games. So a lot of that stuff came in times where we knew an offense was behind the sticks, and they were going to have to hold the ball a little bit longer. But start looking as where you want your games to come. Who has a hard time passing games? How are they doing this? Does the guard lock on the guy and then the tackle tries to lock on his when they get a delay guy? We had very few quick games. Almost all of our games were delayed type games. It's too easy to pass quick games. It's the 1st and 10 when you got to be run sound. You got to run quick games. But when you get to 3rd down, a lot of it or most of it is going to be delayed type games. So we want to see how well those guys pass. And then probably at the end of all that is when we started looking at the individual tapes of offensive linemen. And what we'd do is we'd have a guy that would go through, and every time an offensive lineman got beat, we'd put it on a reel. And we'd have the left tackle reel, and you'd end up with some guys, it would be 5 games. Shit, he might have 7 or 8 plays on there. Some guys might have 35 plays, but you say, okay, this guy got beat on speed to power. This guy got beat on inside move. This guy got beat on whatever. I mean, going way back, slap club, or whatever move it was. We tried to categorize it, and it sort of went there. And then finally, when we got to particularly our third down thing, it was important to try to figure out where that center was going. And as you guys know, a lot of times the center is going where your mic is going. It really has nothing to do with, what, I mean, I go way back, when I was with the Ravens, and, we'd sit there and we'd have a scheme and be 3 by 1. We say, hey, 3 by 1, the center 100% of the time turns to the trip side. Okay, we're going to bring 4 off the weak side. Well, fuck, we bring the mic over, we walk the free safety down. Guess what? The center's just redeclaring. He's hanging with the mic. He's going back weak. Back's picking up the free safety, and we're getting ripped. And after the game, coaches would say, damn, that's the first time they ever turned weak against 3 by 1. No shit. The mic and the free safety were over there. It had nothing to do with what they were doing. It was what you were doing on defense. So then it was trying to figure out where that center was going. And again, trying to be able to pick where your games are going. It's hard to run a TE stunt into the center slide. Obviously you have a much better chance of running away from the center slide. But when it comes to 3-man games, a lot of times your 3-man games are better into the center slide, because that's where you want to make them create that one more pass, and then you also want to try to take that weak side guard out of the equation. So from a preparation standpoint, that's probably where we started. And I can't emphasize enough how important the quarterback is and how important the pass structure is. We tried to tie the defensive line into that, as they called their pass rush games. I don't think it's a very conducive thing for a coach to call pass rush games from the sideline. I think that when we've had success, the coach says, hey, look, the next 3rd and long we want to be running this. Whatever it is, it's within your plan, and you're going to be going. But the players on the field can recognize, whatever, it's 3rd down and 8, and you got, 3-man game called, and the quarterback comes out and empty. Well, shit, your 3-man game it's a dumb call. The ball's going to be gone before. It's either going to be a jailbreak screen or it's going to be thrown quick. Okay? Unless it's empty with Chipper in the protection. I've been very fortunate to have guys like Kyle Vanden Bosch, even Albert Haynes. Albert Haynes was smart as shit. It maybe doesn't have that reputation, but incredibly savvy football player. This year for us in Buffalo, it was a guy named Kyle Williams, who is probably the most unimpressive looking player that I've ever been around that was a great player. Well, when you put it in his hands and say, okay, when the offense comes out and the tight end's off and he's in a square stance, this is what that's an indicator that it's going to be 7-man protection, and the ball, it's going to take longer for the throw to get here. Therefore, we want to go to these rushes. If the tight end is off and out of the core, it's an indicator that whatever, it's 6-man protection, and we want to be in quicker rush games to try to get there. This is an indicator, whatever it is. This is an indicator of 3-step, and we're going to have to change our rush because whatever the double game is not getting home against 3-step. We got to find a way to affect the quarterback there. I don't know if that answered the question, but
yes.
But that's where we would start. Obviously, we go a lot deeper into it, but
I got something.
That's sort of where we started. Go ahead.
All right, one more. All right, one more. I actually have another protection question. Blitzing the back. That's something you did well. That's something we got exposed at early when you were the head coach with Javid, and you did well in Buffalo. So how do you find a way to isolate the back? How can we hide the back in protection?
Well, when you're a defensive coach, There is nothing worse than having a blistering bitch in the backfield that you can't cover. Okay, you got linebackers that can't cover them. You know you got to drop a safety down, but then you're out of your two deep shells, and now you got to get in the single high. It's hard to cover some of these guys. You know, Washburn mentioned Javid Best, who for a season and a half for us was ridiculously good. He was the perfect complement to Calvin Johnson, and we could really click on offense. You couldn't run two-man against us, try to take Calvin out, or one of those stupid one doubles Calvin, because Javid would just wear people out if they tried to do stuff like that. So a lot of these guys, rather than cover them, we try to find a way to say, okay, we can't cover him, well, let's keep his ass in protection. Okay, let's try to figure out a way that we know we can get that back in. Some of it's easy, you know, if the back's offset or in gun back's offset, you know, and you don't cross protect very much, and you feel good about, okay, center's going to slide away from the offset back, so we're going to blitz the back, and we're going to run this fire zone, or we're going to run this single blitz, or even this all-out blitz, and we're going to blitz the back. That's sort of easy stuff, but usually you don't get that easy, because it's very rare that teams are going to be in those 3-and-3 kind of protections where you know that you're going to get the matchup on the back. So you got to sort of find ways to say, okay, who are they declaring? What do you guys say? Declare, spinner, tag. What are you declaring your fifth guy who the center has? You say your tagged guy?
Are you going to be a defensive coordinator again in this league?
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, we declare him as down.
You say there's a down guy. Well, then it became a trick of presenting the offense with a guy that we would think would be more of a threat. Try to get the center to declare him, and then bring another guy to the back to be able to blitz him and keep him in protection. Norv Turner, I always thought, did a good job in protections with showing you an offset back, and you're getting ready to try to blitz that offset back, and then he would bring a tight end in motion and get him off the ball, and the center would slide to the side of the offset back. The tight end would be in protection, and then the back would be free releasing. So now you're trying to blitz him to keep him in, but really you're fighting. And when you have a really good back, when you have that guy that's hard to handle, I think that's a really good scheme for the offense to use. You're still in six-man protection, but now you've shown that offset back, but now he's really the wide receiver, and your tight end's on the other side. You know, I think the biggest trick is, and a lot of it's by feel, a lot of it is a lot of film study, but try to find a way that, whether it's something you've done in the past or something they've seen in the past, some of it's the double A-gap type mug stuff, you get both of those guys up. We started running a lot more double B-gap mug, just because the center wasn't able to declare two mics and pop back and be able to take the only one that came. We'd mug the B-gaps instead, and really try to force a declaration and force a back to step up. But those are probably the biggest things. Like I said, when you have a running back that you don't want to cover, the best thing to try to do is keep him in the protection. But that's a lot of times that's easier said than done.
That's perfect. That's my last protection question, actually. Any other questions with Pass Pro, with protections before we go on?
Just to follow up on the double B gap margin, mainly for you because you're watching, how would you guys handle that? I mean, would you guys try to molly the guard, or you obviously don't want to put you back on the defensive end, like you said, like Javon Curse, so what would be your answer? If they're mugging, whether they're mugging double A gaps with 3 techniques or double B?
Oh, yeah, that's a whole clinic right there, isn't it? I mean, well, we're in Zimmer's division now that he's out of Cincinnati, so that stuff we talk about quite a bit. And there's a multitude of ways you do it. I mean, if the guy's reading post-snap, then you can dummy one guy and go to the other. You know, we have some other stuff, some other mechanisms we have in our protection. You know, you can stay a guy, you know, the tight end, you can full turn it. So to be honest with you, there's not one great answer. You just have to see what kind of threats you have. Are there 6? Are there 7? Are there 8 threats with that split mug? So in truth, there's not a great answer. We're looking for solutions as well because, the guy in our division is the best at it, we think.
Is there one that you're seeing around the league that's more prevalent than others?
Well, I see Hef shaking his head. That's our assistant line coach back there. Seeing the 4-week with the end looping to the far A gap is the one that we're seeing a lot of, if everybody follows what I'm saying on that. That's probably the most common one, I'd say, Jim.
It takes a long time to get home.
Yeah, it does. But you can see a lot of guys like guards dropping the 3 or whatever. Then you see the plug cross where you get the center and the back on different levels. That's always a pain in the butt. And it's always that discussion of, is it best for the back to cross protect or does he want to go same side on that? So those are the ones we're seeing the most right now. But it is definitely in vogue. I know in the NFL and when we're looking at college stuff too. I saw Sam Pittman at Arkansas 2 months ago, and he said that was what they were seeing in the SEC too. Any other protection questions for Jim?
It's really not a question, but just thinking more on protections, we didn't talk a whole lot about 7-man protection. But, a lot of times we could get sacks against 7-man protection because, number one, you're 7-man protecting when the offensive coordinator is saying, look, I got to be blitz-proof here because I got a dagger I got to hit down the field, or I have a deep flat 7 that I'm working, or a double dig, or some kind of concept where I got to get a chunk, and the quarterback's going to hold the ball a while. I can't afford, for him to have to throw it quick or have a check down, so I'm going to 7-man protect. A lot of times our guys could recognize 7-man protection and we'd bail out of blitzes against 7-man protection. There's a lot of indicators and everybody's different, but whether it's tight end off and in the core, 2 backs, in the backfield next to the quarterbacks, whatever it is, we could bail out and then we could get into some 4-man pass rush. And again, a lot of times versus 7-man protection, that's where our Mike stuff, just bringing the Mike linebacker against the center, because the tight end who's got one side, who's going nickel to strong, or Sam the strong safety, and then the back who's on the weak side, who's going will to free safety, those guys, the center's already said, hey, I got 55. 55 is the Mike. So now you bring him, and now you got that Bill Belichick 5-on-5, because the other 2 guys weren't firm in the protection. They had nobody else to block. So they're checking their guys, and they're gone, and all of a sudden now, it's hard to blitz 7-man protection from a side. It's designed to stop 4 from a side, even 5 from a side. You can bring him back across from the other side and just have him double read. But bringing Mike stuff when you have 7-man protection, particularly balanced 7-man protection. I'm not talking about full turn, bringing 2 guys off the end and all that shit. I'm talking about, the center's got the Mike, big on big, and then those guys are reading out most dangerous inside out. A lot of times there we could get to something where we're bringing the Mike, and now you truly have a linebacker on a center one-on-one. Your tackles are on the guards one-on-one. The other guys are probably getting the shit chipped out of them, but they already know it's coming based on the protection. So and sometimes it's even good to rush 3 against 7-man protection, because again, the quarterback's got to hold the ball a long time, and that 7-man pass rush becomes 5-man pass rush real quick when you're not blitzing. Again, the better the quarterback, the harder it is to blitz. There's some guys that it's damn near impossible to blitz. Aaron Rodgers is probably one. Peyton Manning has always been that guy in the NFL throughout his whole career. Just recognizes things and has answers with anything that he throws.
We got another.
Coach, how do you approach those quarterbacks that are quick to get the ball out with O-lines that set up jump set protection? Or where they're time the West Coast style, they come up, they try and get the ball out.
Yeah, if they're jump setting, it's hard to get your tackles to get that good inside penetration. A lot of times, that's where we'd go to running a Mike through. to try to really disrupt that pocket right away. Even to some point, we walked, and you see some film from a couple years ago with Ndamukong Suh, we'd walk him 3-4 yards off the line of scrimmage and get him moving, get 315 pounds moving, because then, short set, quarterback feels it anyway. When you get those guys rushing inside, he feels it anyway. But the short set, a lot of times when we would get short set guys, that was a time for our defensive ends to go inside move. Okay, whether it's counter inside, whether it's speed to power inside, long arm inside, whatever it is, but get inside, because now you're going to have a hard time staying at the same level if the guards are short set. And tackle can't really short set because you've got a guy coming off the edge. So sometimes those guys could get, it opened up a little bit for our guys inside. But I'd say inside blitz, Mike blitz, let him get a run and start and go blow up an A-gap. Make the quarterback feel that inside pressure. Even if it's protected, inside pressure, and particularly guys coming from depth. Quarterback feels that more than any other blitz. I think quarterbacks all feel like they can step up and avoid that nickel. Okay, even if the nickel's running free, they feel like they can, give him that limp shoulder and step up and climb the pocket and be able to throw. But when you bring that Fonzie, when you bring those two guys, and here comes that free safety running right down the pipe, they don't feel good about that. So if a team is protecting inside out and taking that kind of approach, we talk a lot of time not about sacking the quarterback, but making your presence felt. Make that quarterback feel you inside. Albert Hainsworth, when he was 350, lining him and Kyle Vandenbosch off the ball and letting those guys go rush the A-gap, put your linebackers down in 3 techniques with their hand in the ground. We used to do a lot of stuff. I don't know if it made any difference, but we'd have a lot of stuff where we would have down guys that we would tell when the quarterback broke the huddle, when the offense broke the huddle, we wanted them down in the 3-point stance so that the offensive lineman couldn't see, the quarterback couldn't see their number. Okay, they didn't know it was a 55 or one of those things. They were seeing down guys, and it made it a little bit easier to run some of those 5-man pass rush games.
Okay.
We got one over here.
Oh, sorry.
Coach, the double A gap, we see a ton of that, and a lot of times it's away from the quarterback's eye, who drives. When you go to double B gap, must you read it? You have reads like that?
Oh yeah, well, and we'd start with double A gap. Sometimes it's I think the first thing you have to do is you have to prove you're going to bring both. Okay, and if you don't bring both, then none of the other stuff matters, because you have to make the offense know that you're going to bring both guys. So that's where it starts, and then you start messing with guys and you start saying, okay, well, the guy that's going to be the blitzer is the guy that's the side of the offset back. Then, like Wash says, it's sometimes they run cross protection where the center's going to take the backside A gap, and the back got a better angle to come across to take the other mug. So we would start reading a lot of those. And we would tell both guys, both of you guys are coming, and whoever makes contact with the center is buying them. We try to grab him. We try to do as anything. But a lot of times, you put a hand out to grab him, you put both hands out, that center's smart enough to know, number one, don't get grabbed, but number two, that's not the guy that's really coming. Same principles held true when we would double mug the B gap. Those guys come. It's a little bit easier if you got both guys up. If the guard sets you and you're a B gap mug, you got the slide. Boom, repel. You're the drop guy. You're the hole guy looking for the quick throw. You're the zone dropper that comes off of it. So that in my mind, that was a little bit easier of a read for our B gap mug guys rather than our A gap mug guys, because the A gap, it got small in there. Okay, but I think and maybe I'm talking out of my ass, because maybe it had more to do with Ndamukong Suh and Nick Fairley and Albert Hainsworth and Kyle Williams and Marcel Darius and those guys, who they were a lot more threat. The offensive line were a lot more worried about ththose guys than the pissant linebackers that were up there. But we just thought it was easier for our linebackers. I take that back. We didn't think it was easier. Our linebackers thought it was an easier easier read for them rather than both guys trying to, and we do all that shit where, you know, you bring both guys and whatever side the center turns to, the other guy tries to pin his shoulder and that guy's jabbing and trying to come off his ass. I mean, all that stuff we've done, but sometimes that center can make it hard for you. Dominic Raiola, I thought, was excellent in Detroit for us. He could snap and he could get back, and if only one guy was coming, he could take the one guy that was coming. It didn't matter who you declared. So I think that's probably the biggest thing. It gave more width to the inside protection rather than jamming it up inside. You know, if the center can stymie one, the back can get a good angle on the other. The quarterback's in gun. You know, so a lot of that stuff doesn't really sweat the quarterback, but you can get jammed up. With the double A-gap stuff and the other stuff that we had better success with bringing guys from depth because we thought the quarterback felt that more. Even if they were both picked up, the quarterback sees two guys screaming up the A-gap from depth, he's getting rid of the ball. If he's got two guys up in mug, and you can stymie him quick, he feels a lot better about himself throwing that. Anyway, so that's why we went to double B. We just thought it spread the offense a little bit more, and it was easier for those guys to read a guard turning to him or a guard blocking down on the A-gap player than it was trying to read the center when it was only the center popping back.
We just thought Rodgers changed and go back. You did double A-gap mark.
Well, yeah, you know, yeah. Honestly, on the double A-gap mug versus empty, a lot of our A-gap stuff came out because you were either peeling it back when you're double A-gap if you were single blitzing, okay, and you needed a back there. So a lot of our double A-gap stuff was somebody had to detach to go cover a guy. So, you know, a lot of it really didn't have a whole lot of effectiveness against, unless you were all out blitzing, you know, which we've been there also. I think that if you're an offense and you're an empty, and you see double A gap, and you still got a post player high, it's bullshit. Okay, it's a zone blitz, or they're both bailing out and they're playing zone. Because the only way that you can really do it is to play cover zero. If you're truly bringing those guys, and you really want to bring six, somebody's dropping if there's still a guy in the deep part of the field.
Ready for run game? Okay. All right, just go through the background because I think most guys in here know what you run. You know, you ran in Tennessee, Detroit, Buffalo. As far as your base front, do you still call it shark, swim?
No, it was jet last year.
Oh, it was, okay. All right, so with a 9, a 3, 2I, and a 5, right?
Right.
So just go through the quick background of that.
Well, a quick background, when I went to Tennessee in '99, we were an over team. We were over with a shade, a real tight 5 on the open side, and a 6 technique or 7 technique on the tight end side. And Jeremiah's dad wanted to rush the passer. He wanted to get sacks, and he wanted to try to figure out. He had a hard time. We wanted to coach attack, and we wanted to go try to ball key and get off, but we couldn't reconcile trying to play that 6 technique and ball keying. It's really, really hard to do, staying in that C gap and being able to handle all that stuff. So I was working quality control back then, and I would do all the gap fits for runs and stuff like that. And he's like, hold on a second. Look, we got 8 guys to defend 8 gaps. Why can't one of my guys gaps be the edge, be the 9 technique? Let all you other assholes cover those other gaps. Why can't I have that one? I'm like, you can. And he's like, why don't you draw that up for me? So 1999, we were in trailers because we didn't have a new facility yet. I drew it up, and coordinators really didn't like it. You know, hey, that's pass rush front. That's not good versus the run, and it sort of got discarded. But when I became the coordinator, we kept revisiting it, trying to figure out ways to play it. Our 9 technique basically started because of guys like Alex Gibbs, who was up here, guys running the outside zone. Howard Mudd and Tom Moore in Indianapolis, running the outside zone with Edger and James. And no matter what we did, we couldn't stop it. Because even if everybody played it perfectly, he'd still duck in there and he'd get 1 yard or 2 yards, and we could never knock Peyton off track. Well, we're watching film, and we're sitting there going, oh, hell, and a little bit I talked about with Jim, just knowing what they were good at. They had 18, 19, 16, 17, that was it. Shit, the Colts, when they had Peyton Manning, it was outside zone, inside zone, trap, and sprint draw. That was it. A little bit of punch. They started running some punch because they started getting so much Tampa 2 later on, but that was it. Nothing else. Inside zone, outside zone, trap, sprint, draw. You weren't defending anything else. Well, we couldn't stop the stretch. And everybody played it perfect. We still give up yards. And we noticed when they play the Patriots, and Patriots were based out of an odd front, but they had Willie McGinnis and Mike Vrabel, these 6'5", 6'6" guys standing up a couple yards outside that offense, or outside that tight end, and it was impossible to get the edge on them, and they were long, and they had, they could set that edge. And we sit there and say, shit, New England never has to play the stretch. It's all inside zone. That's all they run. They didn't run any trap against New England. First of all, New England's guys just stayed at the line of scrimmage, so they weren't trappable anyway. And they didn't like their sprint draw into that odd front. But they eliminated a lot of runs. And we said, well, what if we can somehow play 3-4 principles in a 4-3? So it took a lot of work to be able to come up with the aiming points, because our 9 technique doesn't just run around like it's third down. Our 9 technique had very specific aiming points. Our wide 5 had very specific aiming points. We ended up with a lot of 2-eye because Albert Hainsworth couldn't play shade and he couldn't stay in an A-gap. But if we got the 2-eye and just went as fast as he could, Bullock could play off of him. So what I'm saying, we started going from traditional over defense to more what people call the wide 9, and the reason was to prevent the Indianapolis Colts from running the stretch play. And it worked. Howard did not want to run the stretch into the wide 9. He was knocking the shit out of that tight end. That tight end couldn't get his first step in the ground without those guys, those guys were ball keying and just wearing his ass out. There's something interesting that happened, and we didn't even know that it would happen, but we would have to work our asses off on all Peyton Manning's deep play actions. That shit where he'd stretch way out and then turn his back to the defense and then set up and throw, and all those deep transcontinental deep crossers and everything else, and it was impossible to work all these things. Well, after running wide 9 for a couple games, started looking, it's like we don't get those play actions anymore. And what we didn't, it was an unintended result, it was good for us, is we found out Peyton Manning didn't want to turn his back on a 9 technique. Okay, it was easy. When that guy's fighting that C-gap and that tight end could pretend to cut him off and wash him down and bim his ass in there, and quarterbacks sit back there and bake a pizza and have all the time in the world to do it, well, he felt good about that. But when he had, and some of his tight ends weren't very good, when that guy's sitting here and there's whoever, Kyle Vandenbosch, Javon Curse, Mario Williams, you make up a name, it's hard for that guy to step, and even if he steps and pivots, that guy's on his ass. He's not a left tackle. He's not a right tackle. Peyton didn't like to turn his back. He didn't want to get hit on play action. So as a result, we saw that as an unintended result. Well, then at first it was just more of a game plan defense for us. We'd run it against the Colts. And then we started saying, you know what? If this is what we are, 17, 18, 16, 17, let's get good at it. And rather than trying to play over and under and 46 and everything else, let's get good at playing this. Let's eliminate some runs by design. Eliminate the outside runs. Force them to slug it out inside. Force them to go to a very set runs where you knew what you had to practice, and started going to it full time. And it takes some work. It takes some work trying to balance the back end out. Strong safety having a C gap as opposed to having the force on the outside. It's a little bit different key for those guys. But what happened is we found out that it fit our personnel. It fit our personnel in Tennessee. It fit our personnel in Detroit. Cliff Averill, end up Kyle Vanden Bosch, Ziggy Ansah, those kind of guys. It fit our personnel in Buffalo, and I think that's probably the biggest thing is it fit our personnel. But number one, it put our guys in position that they could eliminate something in the run game. We could eliminate the width of the running game right away. It's hard to run stretch into an attack 9 that's knocking the shit out of the tight end, or wide 5 that's getting a running start and setting an edge on an offensive tackle. But then also it put us in the best position to be able to rush the passer. Okay, so we could rush versus non-rush situations. So that was sort of an unintended side effect. And the other thing is that front carried over from 21 personnel to 11 personnel to 10 personnel, 12 personnel. It didn't matter. So unlike some teams, and I mentioned the Patriots before, where the Patriots were a base 3-4 team when they were facing 12 and 21, and all of a sudden when it was third down, they were running out of an even front and they were running their 4-down stuff. It was easier for us because we only had one run front to fit. And whether it was nickel, whether it was base, whether it was extra backer, our guys knew how to fit that. And we were at our best when I was in Tennessee, Buffalo last year, whether it was Detroit, whenever, we were at our best when we didn't do very much. We didn't have to do very much. You got Jerry Hughes, you got Kyle Williams, you got Marcel Darius, Mario Williams. Let those guys go play. Blitz 8% of the time. I think we blitzed on third down. We were last in the NFL in blitz percentage, but we were first in the NFL in sacks. Number one, not having to devote an extra guy to blitz, but number two, just letting those guys do what they were good at. So we sort of fell into that front from a standpoint of we were doing it as a game plan, and then, and I mentioned Hainsworth before. Hainsworth couldn't stay in his gap at all, but he could knock the shit out of guys once he got that 350 north-south in a hurry. And we had Keith Bullock that played behind him most of the time, and we just told Keith, okay, look, well, you got the B gap, but if Albert's in the B gap, let's just take the A. And for Keith, that was perfect. I mean, that's all he needed. I just have to take it. Yeah, that's all you have to do. Well, the other thing that helped us is Albert couldn't stay in his gap. He'd get cut out, he'd get chopped when he was in the nose, whatever it would be. Well, when Edgerrin was running the stretch and we didn't have an edge, we had that 6 technique or that 7 technique over there, Albert was out of the play. He didn't exist. He was gone. Now, has Howard been to this clinic before?
Oh, yeah.
All that trick-ass blocking, run up the field and circle back on guys and all that shit. None of that shit existed when that edge was set real fast because you couldn't backdoor a guy because Hainsworth was chasing it down right through the back door. So we also found out by setting that hard edge, we let Albert Hainsworth play. And I've been very fortunate to be around guys like Ndamukong Suh, Corey Williams, Nick Farrelly, Sammy Hill in Detroit last year with Kyle Williams and Marcel Darius, that we needed to find a way to keep those guys alive and keep them in the play. And even if they were out of their gap, you couldn't trick block them because that ball was cutting back really fast. So I don't know.
It's good, yeah.
I didn't answer the question here.
No, more or less. No, I got 2 questions for run game. First one is this. How much does formation tendency matter in the run game for you as a defensive play caller? And then 2 is, do you pick an emphasis run concept to stop, and then how? And I think about when Chicago's running the G lead real well and things
Right.
like that. So those are the 2 questions I have run game.
Well, when you run wide 9, there's always going to be some plays that people are going to try. They're going to start with G lead because they're going to see that guy out in that wide 9, and they're going to say, okay, well, tight end's going to block him. We're going to down block the 3. We're going to pull that guard. We're going to crease the shit out of him. Well, then all of a sudden they try to run it, and Kyle Vanden Bosch takes the tight end and puts him right into the running back's lane, and it doesn't exist anymore. But when you're not as strong, when you have matchups that aren't quite as good, you got to figure out some ways to be able to handle it. And that usually came when people ran G lead against us, it came from the 2-eye. Because the 2-eye, the one thing, and one of the reasons we went to Haynesworth doing that, is it kept him away from combination blocks. Okay, particularly tight end side. It's hard to run open side, or it's hard to run tight end side against a lot of that stuff. Well, they tried to run tight end. Their combination didn't exist. Now it was just a guard trying to handle Haynesworth one-on-one, and the center had to come off fast on that mic. Okay, he had to go get that mic. That was key to getting the defense cut. He's climbing that mic right now. So we knew where our weakness was. We knew what we had to defend. Wash mentioned just having game plan adjustments. One of our things there would be taking the 2-eye and slanting him inside. If they're going to cheat and they're going to get the center up to the mic right now, well then we're going to cheat and get in the back door. And we nailed Chicago for a lot of tackle for losses for that. But philosophically, our run game always started with, what are we going to take away? What are we taking away? We can't play everything. Okay? We can't play this. Let's take something away by alignment, and then let's practice the shit out of the other stuff. We had to practice the shit out of the trap play because we were an attack defense that was ball keen and we were getting off the ball. First thing offensive line coach, shit, we're going to trap those guys. Well, we had to practice the shit out of the trap. We had to practice the shit out of the crack toss because you couldn't get an edge on us unless you cracked. Okay, so it eliminated a lot of plays that we would start with. So run-wise, we would always start with, okay, what are we taking away? And if we were going to take something away, we generally tried to take away what an offense's bread and butter was. If they were, whatever, a G League team, if they were, an inside zone team, we'd work really hard at defending that and then say if they're going to beat us, it's going to have to be with running plays that they're not really good at. The first part of that question was something that was good.
Formation tendency.
Oh, formation tendencies. There's too much quarterback check with me, run game wise. There was very little formation-wise that we tried to scheme run game because it was so easy for the quarterback to opposite check. It's so easy for the tight end to come off. We would do stuff and we'd scheme stuff off. If we were an over front or jet front, 3 technique to a tight end side, tight end motion across the ball, we'd build in opposite calls where our 3 would slant into a 2-eye, our 2-eye would slant out to a 3, but all that stuff was based on movement that would come. I think that's probably, what else do I have there? Is there anything else that's pertinent on that?
Run game wise?
Yeah, I mean, as far as formation. One thing is, and we've all been a part of this, run pass or run checks or defensive checks based on gun versus quarterback under center. You got to make sure that you can run everything that you're going to run at a pistol gun. And we considered pistol under center. If it was a dot back, if it was a back behind the quarterback, we consider it that. But it depended on the week. But there'd be a lot of weeks that we'd have an AFC, an automatic front and coverage, and it would strictly be based on quarterback under center, quarterback in gun. Is there a dot back? Is there not a dot back? If you have strong tendencies there, that's going to be one. We can get in an 8-man front versus a run tendency. We can get in a 7-man front versus a pass tendency. But that's probably the biggest thing. We look that way for run-pass things, 8-man front versus 7-man front, rather than trying to defend one side versus the other. It's everybody can count. I mean, if you can count to 3, you got a good chance to be able to go away from an overload in the run game.
Absolutely. No, that's all I had for you run game wise, Jim. Does anybody have any questions run game wise?
Coach, I need to defend the backside of the zone read, the defensive end that's being read.
Yeah, we double dipped our will a lot of times because we're an over team, so that was our bubble side, so we're B-gap there. So if you're going to veer block that offensive tackle and you're going to read that defensive end and that offensive tackle's climbing up to the will, we would tell that will linebacker that as soon as they veer block, he backdoor right now because our defensive end would squeeze right now for the B gap, because now a B gap didn't exist anymore. As soon as that veer block happened, that defensive end would squeeze as hard as he could for the dive because he had to chase the dive. Okay, if you put him in, I heard a great, Jay Gruden one time, it was a great term for it. He called it surf technique. And I think you guys all see that open side end come off, and then he like drops down like this, and he's sitting there surf. He said he's not playing one or the other. Well, we had better success with telling our defensive end, you don't get blocked, close like a bitch, come blister down right off his ass, and you got the running back. Don't try to play both. You know, chase 2 rabbits, catch 0. Go take that one away right now. And that Will linebacker sitting in the bubble, he gets tackled up on him right now, flash, and then backdoor for the quarterback right away. Okay, so that's one on the open side. We tried to play as fast as we could on the open side. Tight end side would be a little bit different. One of the few times we didn't play a 9 technique is when we had back offset to the tight end and we get read option. We'd make a tight call. We'd bring our 9 down to basically a 5 technique, and he would try to feather it. We didn't want to feather and we wanted to try to make the action happen fast. Maybe you guys are in high school and in college and you're facing quarterbacks that aren't afraid to run the ball, quarterbacks that don't worry about getting hit. We're trying to hit the quarterback. We want the ball in the quarterback's hands. Now, obviously you change that a little bit. You got Colin Kaepernick or one of those other guys, but we want the quarterback to try to pull the ball because we're trying our whole, the whole week to try to figure out ways to get hit on a quarterback. You want to give us one, we're going to take it. So bubble side, that was probably one of the other ones. The other ones was trying to take the quarterback, let everybody play their gaps up front, and you guys probably see it all the time in high school and college because everybody plays quarters, because that quarter safety becomes the guy that has to clear the quarterback before he can go anywhere else. Playing post defense, a lot of times we gave our post player, anytime he got read action, post player didn't start getting his depth. He sort of slow read it, and if the quarterback pulled it, then he'd be an alley player for the quarterback. But what we wanted to do is we wanted to eliminate the read. We wanted to eliminate the problem for the defensive lineman trying to play 2 guys. They thought you try to play 2, you play 0, go as fast as you can. And then that's just a basic zone read on the open side. And a lot of other stuff. We figured that, that in NFL in particular, guys, if the quarterback was keeping it, we're trying to pimp him into keeping the ball because we had somebody coming back door. Will linebacker flashing and coming, a quarter safety or post player that was coming for him, and try to eliminate 2 things for a guy to do. But one thing that happens with zone read, I mentioned Javon Curse, just long as shit. Ziggy Ansah in Detroit, Mario Williams. And our field is so much more, middle of the field oriented. It's hard to get a wide side. Those guys can cover so much ground. They can come down and close, and they can get that foot in the ground and come back and go get that quarterback. It's unbelievable how good run defenders, defensive ends can be.
Offensive part for a second. You give the pointers on the proper techniques for tackling. It seems to be a dying art.
Yeah, the question was proper techniques of tackling. I think we've all sort of gone there from a coaching standpoint. The biggest thing in the NFL is we had to try to figure. One guy I thought that was outstanding doing this, and I'm sure he'd probably be willing to help you with this. John Bonamago is now the head coach at Central Michigan, and we would do a circuit of different kind of tackles, angle tackles, and what do you call it? Hooking the sweep the leg, and different things, and we would do those just about every day. In Buffalo last year, I stole a lot of those drills, and we would start practice with a circuit on tackling. Defensive line would do it, and then they'd rotate over to somewhere else, and the DBs would come and do the same drills. Because whatever fundamental you're using in tackling, everybody's going to, at some point, need to get head across the bow, need to throw arms, need to run feet on contact. But I think, for you guys that are in high school or even other colleges, contact somebody on his staff. He has great training tapes on tackling drills that you can do without pads, and you can also do with just helmets. I mean, they were a big part of our OTAs. They were a big part of our training camp practices because, high school guys probably the same way. You can't afford to get guys hurt. It's hard to practice tackling when, there's too much of a risk of losing guys. NFL guys are no different when it comes to that. So we would do a lot of things that we would simulate, but it would be slow. I think one thing that we probably have gotten away from, going back, I guess, 20 years, it was taught, when I first got into the NFL, everybody was coaching that you were tackling with the crown of your head. You were trying to see what you hit. You weren't ducking your head, but you were trying to get him right down the middle. And what you were trying to do is you were trying to give yourself margin for error on either side. If you tried to take the guy right down the middle and you missed, well, you were making a shoulder tackle. But otherwise, you were fronting him up. That's now being coached out of the game, and now you're trying to get your head to one side or the other. But John Bonamago, Central Michigan, probably the best guy I've been around. He was a special teams coach, but all of our defensive coaches spent a lot of time with him, and some of his drills were outstanding.
Hey, Coach Wiley, how's it look?
You got 8 minutes.
Okay.
Do you have a least favorite personnel and formation, Steve?
No, because I think all of them have their own flavor. It really depends on where you are defensively. I mean, obviously, if you're short of defensive backs, you have a hard time covering 11 personnel and trying to cover 10 personnel and all the wide receivers to come out. The basis of our defense, and it wasn't this way when I first went to Tennessee, because Buddy Ryan's defense was very, very specific into who was in the game offensively. And what they played against 21 personnel, they did not play against 11 personnel. Well, you're just one coach in the press box eating a hot dog and missing a personnel calling. Some of it's hard. Some guys cheating, running guys on the field, running guys off the field. What we found is everything had to play against everything. So then it just became sort of more matchups. We didn't always match personnel groups. Teams try to go 11 personnel on first down, we'd stay base and play 2. And it's like, okay, well, what do you want to do? Do you want to run the ball against base defense, or do you want to throw into cover 2? We'd go nickel and play 8-man front and say, okay, what do you want to do? You want to throw the ball in the nickel, or you want to run versus, 7-man front, run versus an extra defender? I think probably the biggest thing there just depended on where you were defensively. You got to defend them all. So where you are. I think the hardest thing gap control-wise is 22 personnel, because you have not only the extra gap from the fullback, but 22 and 13 personnel. 13 can be, if you don't know exactly what you're doing on defense, 13 personnel can wear your ass out. 2 tight ends, all 3 tight ends ganged up on one side, a guy motioning across. Easy, simple stuff like insert plays or inside zones. You can crease guys because it's hard to, guys don't practice those gap controls very much. So I'd say probably from a preparation standpoint, 22 and 13 are probably the most difficult things, because you don't see very much of it, and it does add an extra layer to your run defense.
22 with the Z, say you got 22 with the Z in the boundary. Then you motion into the field. That's a pain.
Yeah, I mean, that's the hardest formation adjustment, because a lot of times you only have one corner on the field. And even if you're playing zone, that guy has to chase that wide receiver. And when he does, you got to rotate your whole secondary. So the question Bob had was 22 personnel. If you have tight ends on both sides and you motion a wide receiver across the ball, it is a difficult adjustment, because now rather than one, unless it's man-to-man, if it's man-to-man, one guy moves, it's easy. But when it's zone, there's a lot of moving parts behind that. But the motions that come out of 13 personnel, extra offensive linemen in there, trying to defend that extra gap, those can be difficult. Where we started making a little progress on that is we still played our jet front. We still played a 9 and a 5, and we tried to carry over as much of our techniques, as much as our keys and continuity as we could, so we didn't have a totally different defense versus a particular personnel group.
Jim, how would you do it if you did what Josh did at New England, where they played with 4 offensive linemen with an extra line receiver in the game?
Right.
And then Baltimore couldn't get lined up. Do you have a go-to, a timeout?
Yeah, the question Bob asked if, when New England was doing, which is now illegal to do. They passed a rule in the meetings with the eligible, declaring ineligible. We defensively, and I say we, talking about defensive coordinators, we got pretty good at the guys coming in wiping. The extra offensive lineman comes in and they say, okay, 77's eligible. Well, we understood how to handle that from a man-to-man standpoint, how to handle that from a zone standpoint, how we wanted to handle. A lot of times we would blitz opposite him, and then whoever was covering that guy would blitz, and we'd say, shit, unless it's on the goal line, we ain't covering the asshole. Right? I mean, just go ahead and throw it to him. If it's on the goal line, we got to cover him all, because if he catches it, it's a touchdown. But otherwise, hey, let's go. And zone principles too. But that became a little bit easier, and running the unbalance off of that, redeclaring an offensive lineman and saying, okay, 63's now to center, everybody pushing over and putting that in their brains. But New England this year took it a step further when they took eligible players and made them ineligible. So 34 goes out, lines up as a wide receiver, but they're wiping him as ineligible. It's extremely difficult to disregard that guy. Okay, from a defensive standpoint, your zone fits, man-to-man, even if they say, and they were doing a really good job, because he's sitting there showing, throw me the ball, where he's ineligible. He's lined up on the line of scrimmage and was covered by somebody else. You guys ever seen the film of that A11 offense? Yeah, you guys, there was a loophole in college, in high school ball somewhere, where all those guys just lined up. One guy would step on, one guy would step off. Shit, you had to cover all 11 of them. It was a nightmare. We were real close to getting there in the NFL. So now the rule is, if you are ineligible, that's wiping ineligible, you have to be in the box. And thank goodness they made the change, because I don't know how to defend that. It's like a special teams play on every play. Everybody's eligible, because you're one step away from this, Bob. Why put anybody in an ineligible jersey? Why not just put your center in 34 and your left guard in 21 and put all those guys, and then they break the huddle and say 21, 34, 48 are all ineligible. Because then there's no reason then to, they sort of got away from that a little bit. But the other stuff is still there, putting that extra offensive lineman in there. When you put an extra offensive lineman in his tight end, defensive coordinator first things thinks, I better gang up on the run. But if it's a pass, what's going to happen? It's going to be 7-man protection, and he's taking a shot deep down the field. So it puts you in a bind defensively, unless you can find a way to add to that rusher to get the ball out a little bit quicker.
I always thought if I were you guys, I would make front 7 all 90 numbers. I'm serious.
Right.
Because when you get down, your offensive line coach,
Right. Trying to decipher numbers.
linebacker, who's the end, who's the back, they're all 90s.
Right.
I don't care what numbers I use. They're all 90s.
Yeah, and I think that, like I said, we had some times where we would try to hide numbers from guys. We'd stack guys behind another guy and try to keep them away from being able to see them. Some of it would look pretty comical. But I've been on the other side of that defensively. Shit, we were playing the Raiders. Might have been. It wasn't. it might have been the AFC Championship game. I mentioned the Raiders, but we had a wide receiver that followed the quarterback out of the huddle and got down in a frog stance right in behind, and I swear our nickel could not find him. Our nickel's looking all around for the slot. He doesn't know what to do. He walks out this way, and then the guy just motioned away from wherever he would line up, and they just wore us out a little bit before our guys were able to recognize where he was. That trick play on special teams where those guys would get right in behind the guy and they'd snap the ball and hold it between their legs, and the one guy would take it and then he'd just hold it and then go. A lot of that was guys trying to hide. But, you know, one thing we always talk about is, you know, we'd laugh and you'd say, hey, how are you going to stop, you know, make up a name, Edgerrin James? Well, you know, we know he wears, you know, whatever number. You know, defensively, it's the same thing. It's hard to hide Mario Williams. He's 6'6", he's 300 pounds. You know, when he wears number 90, you know, it's a pretty good key where, you know, hey, how you going to know where he's going to line up? Well, wherever number 90 lines up, that's where Mario Williams is. So we would try to sort of hide guys in there. Particularly, we go to 5 down sometimes. We had a guy in Tennessee that was a defensive end that wore a 50s number, and one of his reasons of wearing a 50s number, we went to our 5 down stuff, we thought it just disguised it a little bit more. He'd line up with depth and then walk up, and, you know, I mean, if you're ready for it, you practice against it, it shouldn't be that much of a problem. But 90s numbers are hard, particularly when you get guys moving around a little bit.
Are you finding that the college spread game, inside the trenches and outside, and even defensively and offensively, is affecting the NFL?
The college spread game?
Yeah, spread game.
Oh, no question. No question spread games carried over to the NFL. I think the biggest difference, though, is this. And I think it's the reason that it won't turn into college football, is college football coaches only have their quarterbacks for at most 4 years. Maybe 3 if the guy's really good and he's moving on. NFL, you draft a guy, you pay him $20 million a year, you expect him to be with your team a long time. We work our asses off. We stay till midnight every night trying to figure out some way that we can hit your quarterback. If you're going to give us a hit on the quarterback, we're going to take it. The guy that's the hardest to defend in the NFL and read option is Russell Wilson. Not because he's the biggest threat. Kaepernick and some of those other guys can be a bigger threat with the ball. Where Russell Wilson was the best is Russell Wilson won't take a hit. Russell Wilson is content to get 6 yards when he could potentially get 8. Or he's content to take 8 when he could get 10, or he could make a big play. He pulls the ball in the read option. If we're wrapping that will linebacker and here he comes for him, he might just slide and grab grass and gain 2 yards. But we didn't get a hit. He gets close to the sideline, he's running out of bounds. Some guys aren't as smart. Some guys are going to take those hits. And what's going to happen is, over the course of time, those hits are going to roll up. It's a short-term solution when you have 20 million players, $20 million players back there. When you have so many resources devoted to those guys, it does make you defend it. I mean, I'm a terrible athlete, but I really think I could run read option on the goal line. You know what I mean? You got to cover 4 yards. You got to get in. You know, I might be able to get 4 yards. So it affects. I think long-term wise, it more affects red zone, short yardage. But even short yardage, you can give up a 3rd down and 1 in the first quarter. You know, you get a hit on the quarterback, or, you know, you give it up, it's not that big a deal. When it's 3rd and goal and the 1, you can't give up 1 yard. So I think that's probably where its continued impact in the NFL is probably going to be more in the red zone than it is going to be on the other stuff, because there's ways to try to have bodies on that guy, and you don't want that guy getting hit.
Jim,
We're done.
That's it, fellas.
Thanks, guys.